Ladies and gentlemen, now I am very thrilled to introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Dr. Maya Stiller. Dr. Stiller is a distinguished scholar in Korean art history and visual culture. She received her PhD from UCLA in 2014 and currently holds the position of Associate Professor at the University of Kansas in the US. Today, Dr. Stiller will be giving us an insightful lecture titled Paintings, Songs, Board Games, Imaginary Travels to Kumgangsan in Late Choson, Korea. How exciting is it? So, her extensive research and expertise in this field promises to offer illuminating insights into Korean art. So without further delay, let's give her a big hand and welcome her for her delivery.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you again to the Academy of Korean Studies for the kind invitation to give a talk here at the Societas Koreana. It's a great honor to be here. My name is Maya Stiller, and I am originally from Berlin, Germany, but I moved to the United States more than 10 or 15 years ago, and then my career as an art historian teaching Korean art began at the University of Kansas. And I'm just briefly here in Korea for a few days because I was attending a conference at Kŭmgangsan University in Daegu, where I gave a talk about Korean studies and digital humanities. And now here I am talking about my project on Kumgangsan. Now, before I get into my actual topic, I would like to ask every one of you to just briefly take a moment and think about a very sacred site in your home country that has been known for centuries. Okay, so think about your home country, think about a holy site, very famous. Everyone in your country wants to go to that place at least once in their lifetime. Does everyone have something in their mind? Can you think of something? Yes?
In Cambodia, everyone wishes to at least visit Angkor Wat.
Angkor Wat.
Once in a lifetime.
I actually had the honor to be there, and it's a beautiful site, really impressive. Yes, so something like Angkor Wat in Cambodia. So I believe every one of you has something in their mind now, right? So just think about this site and how do people today go to that place? You know, do they walk? Do they take public transportation? How do they get there? Do they go there by plane, right? So this is one way how we can think about a site and like sort of like pilgrimage sites in today's world, right? But now let's step back a little bit and maybe 300, 400 years ago, how did people walk or go to that site in your home country? How did they get there? How did people in Cambodia, when perhaps it wasn't even called Cambodia yet, that country, right? How did people go and visit Angkor Wat? Who was allowed to go there? Could anyone enter that place, right? Or were just a few people fortunate enough to be able to go there and see the site, right? So these are the questions that I had in mind when I started my research on Kumgangsan. So Kumgangsan, and you may have gotten a taste of it when we heard the introduction today, is basically the site in Korea. For centuries, it has been the site that everyone wanted to visit. So there's a very famous saying in the Choson period. So Choson period is the time period from around the late 14th to late 19th century. Okay, so during that time period, there was a saying among people who lived on the Korean peninsula that before I die, I want to go and see Kumgangsan at least once. Some people were fortunate enough, they had enough money, they had enough connections to go there 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, but the majority of the people didn't even get to go once. Okay, so that's the context, all right? Now let me get started. So I had the honor to actually visit North Korea a few times to do my research there, field research, because the mountain that we're talking about, Kumgangsan, is currently located in North Korea. And until 2008, it was possible to visit the site for South Koreans. And as someone who has German citizenship, I was able to go and see it in 2014, and that was the last time I've been there. So it's been 10 years already. So this is a picture I took in the outer part of the mountain. So there is an inner part and an outer part of Kumgangsan, and the outer part is known for these very eroded granite cliffs. And the cliffs of Manmulcho are these like quintessential. The pictures are very big, so it sometimes might take a while to come up. Okay. So these eroded granite cliffs, that's what Kumgangsan is mostly famous for. If you ever get to Gangwon province and you go to Seoraksan, okay, that's another famous mountain, not as famous as Kumgangsan, but the landscape is quite similar to Kumgangsan, I found. So if you ever want to get a taste of Kumgangsan while in South Korea, go to Seoraksan, okay? And this is the inner part of the mountain, inner Kumgang or Naekumgang. So look at the beautiful green, like lush trees. So I actually went to Kumgangsan in May 2014, so around the same season that we're having right now. And it's a very lush forest. There are like elms and linden and oak trees. It kind of reminded me of a German forest, actually. It was very beautiful and barely untouched. No deforestation issues that you could frequently see in other parts of North Korea, but not so much in Kumgangsan because it's a protected national park. And in present times, this is what Kumgangsan is mostly known for South Koreans and perhaps even North Koreans. It is the place where people that have been, families that have been separated during the Korean War can meet each other after many, many years of separation. And more than 20, maybe even 30 of these meetings have taken place at Kumgangsan, at a hotel at Kumgangsan in the last 25 or so years. And here you can see pictures of relatives that have to say farewell after like a 2-day reunion. And on the left-hand side is a little poster that I took from an exhibition catalog that also says Kumgangsan is the place where the dream of reunification begins. So in today's now South Korean society, Kumgangsan is not only a very famous cultural site and religious site, but it also has this taste of longing for reunification. Okay, and this is me at Kumgangsan climbing the rocks, right? And this was the outer part of the mountain, so you can see it's very steep. And these were my travel companions or minders, if you may call them. So the people on the left, these two, there it is. These two people were, they accompanied me from Pyongyang all the way to Kumgangsan. And then these two, this woman was the guide, and then he joined us because the team at Kumgangsan had received the information that I liked mountain climbing, and so he thought that I was going to climb some tall peak with him, but it was raining that day, and so I said, you can come with us, but I'm not going to climb any steep rocks because it had rained the day before, so it was a little dangerous. And there we are having a little gimbap lunch in front of one of the most famous waterfalls of Kumgangsan, Koryongpokpok, 9 Dragon Falls. I felt it was a very special moment to have lunch in front of a waterfall that people have been writing poems about for centuries. And as you can see, this background of the slide shows inscriptions, and I will talk a little bit more about these inscriptions in a little bit. My research method is very various. So I'm a trained art historian and Korean studies specialist and Buddhist studies scholar. And so I combine these different fields in my research. So of course I did on-site field research. I also looked at literary records. I looked at visual material, and I looked at the inscriptions, and it turns out that many of the people who went to Kumgangsan in the Choson period wrote their names in the mountains. I don't know about Angkor Wat, but maybe in your home country there may be a place where people also leave their name. There's in Athens on the Acropolis. There's actually names of people who visited the site in like the 18th century. So this kind of tradition of leaving your name at a famous site is known throughout the world, but it is at Kumgangsan where we really have a concentration of that kind of tradition. So this is kind of the social history perspective that I bring into the field. And then I also did a lot of data visualization through maps. So if you ever get to check out my book on Kumgangsan, you will see quite a few maps in there, and we will also see some maps that I made today in this presentation. So I will first talk a little bit about what it was like if you lived in the Choson period, you wanted to go to Kumgangsan, how could you actually do it? Okay, so we're going to talk about the actual travelers a little bit, and then we will talk about imaginary travels, which is, I argue, is what most people were able to do. Through songs, through maps, through board games, through paintings, through travel diaries. Okay, so this is just a map of the peninsula that shows you the location of Kumgangsan. So as I said earlier, it is just 20 kilometers north of the DMZ in Gangwon province. And this is a map that I made in order to understand how do people travel through the mountain. So as it turns out, there were various highways in the Joseon period. The center was Seoul. Like in France, the center of transportation, everything starts in Paris, right? In order to get to somewhere, you have to start out in Paris. So similarly, in the Joseon period, wherever you were in the peninsula, you had to go to Seoul first, and then you could go to Kumgangsan, because the road was just better. Transportation was easier. Now, once you were at Kumgangsan, what did you do? You would start in the inner part of the mountain, the lush forest that we just saw, right? That's on this part of the mountain. You would take this route, visit a couple of temples and see some beautiful waterfalls. And then Nesujom was kind of the turning point to the outer part of the mountain. And so you would then go to Yujomsa, leave the mountain at Baekcheonggyo, go out. So from around Yujomsa, you could go on your horse again. It was kind of flat territory. So there you can go on horseback all the way out, and then back into the outer part of the mountain, see Paryonan. And this is again where you had to walk. Horses would not help, or you would be carried by the monks. And then you would see Shingesa, and then the peak, the highlight of the outer part of the mountain was those 9 dragon falls where I had lunch with my minders, right? And then people either traveled further north or further south, a little bit more for a couple more days, and then returned to Seoul. So that was kind of the typical path through the mountain, and it expanded. So in the early Joseon, people would primarily travel in the inner part of the mountain, and then once they figured out a way to easily get into the outer part of the mountain, they traveled that part as well, but that's more like a later development. Okay, so I call this the travel package. Today you can go to any travel agency, or you go online and you want to go to Cambodia and see famous sites, or you want to go to Honduras or some other place in the world. Well, what's the easiest way to do this? You just buy a package. Everything's included. Flight, hotel, everything, right? So there was a kind of travel package in the Joseon period as well. But of course, who could afford it? Who was eligible for it? Not us, not the average person, but only very, very special people with really strong, they had very powerful political positions in society. So it was very distinguished people only were able to go to Kumgangsan using this kind of travel package. Okay, so what does this package look like? Oh, okay. Oh yeah, 다음에. So this is what a elite travel looked like in the Joseon. So usually, what you see here is an early century photograph of an elite traveler on a burro, and he's, this is actually his little servant. So either horseback, or they would be carried in a palanquin. And this is how you traveled if you were someone with influence in the Choson period. So what do we do today when we travel to a place that we haven't been yet to? You would probably Google the site, the place, and just find out some information about the history and the culture of the place, right? Maybe you would also search on Google Map where the exact location is. So everything's through the internet these days. But back in the day, in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, people read. So they went to literary collections of their ancestors, of people they knew. They looked through the records, and in many cases, one of their ancestors had left a writing, had left a travel account, had been to Kumgangsan. And so they would read that just to get a sense of, what it is like to get there, what are the things that they saw that I have to see too, kind of. Some people would also look at paintings, but it wasn't really it was optional, okay? The most important thing was to read the text. Read what your ancestors had done, and then you have to follow what your ancestors had been doing. And then I will talk about the other stages as well as we go on. So first of all, read the Munjip by previous travelers. And this is an example of a vayorok. So there were, at some point in the 17th, 18th century, because it became more and more popular to read travel accounts of other people, that people started to compile those collections. And this is one of them from the late 17th, early 18th century. So people can go, imagine themselves going on that trip through by reading these accounts. Okay. Yeah, and I mean, we could also look at paintings, but in most cases, the paintings are actually just a record of having been there. I've looked at more than 300 travel accounts, and not a single one of them says, I looked at a painting and then I went. They all say, I read travel accounts and then I went. So we don't really know exactly when these paintings were, when people used them in preparation for travel, but in most cases they were using them after coming back from travel, when they were longing for Kumgangsan. Then they would take out the painting and look at it again. And so in the case of Chosån, he actually he was traveling with very powerful people that took him along the trip because he was too poor to go by himself. And then they just commissioned paintings from him because he was a very renowned painter. And this is the inner part of the mountain. Yes. And as you can see, we have those really, really steep hills on the one hand, and then these lower lying hills on the other hand. So this is representing the inner part of the mountain. And then we have a couple of buildings, and these buildings are part of temples. So we got Changhansa, Pyeonsa, Cheongyangsa, and there's like little inscriptions that tell us exactly where we are. And then maybe you can see it, there are actually some footsteps. Choson added some footsteps here and there, so you could basically imagine following the path into the mountain. This is a late 18th century painting by another famous Joseon period painter named Kim Hong-do, court painter. And so you can see a different painting technique, right? Choson, he kind of zoomed out and gave us a view of the entire mountain. And Kim Hong-do really zooms in to one spot at the mountain. And as you can see, we have a little pool of water here, little waterfalls. We see some trees near the water, and then it kind of phases out, right? There's like nothing going on here, but then Kim Hong-do did a very good job depicting the rocks. And in comparison to Choson, he was using a rather dry brush, like almost like a crayon, right? But this is ink, right? It's really amazing what you can do with ink, the tonality of ink. It's basically just water and pine soot, right? And it's really amazing what painters were doing back then and still do today, just using this one type of material and using it in various ways. All right, so looking at paintings was one thing. And then there were later traditions based on what Choson and Kim Hong-do and others had painted in a similar style, continued into the 19th century as well. So I was talking about Google Map earlier, right? These nice and neat Mercator-based maps that we're using today. Well, those didn't exist back in the 18th, 19th century. So what do people do? Well, this is a palm-size map that travelers took with them on the road. So it's very, very convenient to just have it in your pocket all the time. But look at the dimensions and look at the distribution of the map versus the text. What do you notice? Anyone? Any idea? Any observation? How would this compare with like Google Map or any other kind of map that you would use today? Could you say it again? Lots of text, exactly, right? So how important was it for the people back in the 19th century to look at the map? What do you think? What did they prioritize? Text, right? It's kind of obvious. So in comparison to, visual material has always been important for human mankind, but today particularly, visual material is so important, right? Everyone's on TikTok, Instagram, Google Maps, etc., etc. But back in the day, visual material was important, but for an elite scholar, what was even more important was text. You don't study through maps and paintings, you study through text. So it was really important to study the place, okay? And so as we can see, the maps, could you go back? Yeah. The maps, and also they're kind of crude, so they don't really help when you're trying to figure out where to go, right? So what people did back then, they just asked. They just went on the road, and then they just had to ask people, okay, where's the next postal station? Where do I have to go? There were no signposts, right? So you really had to go and figure it out on your own, more or less. But what this did was it gave you an idea. If you were an official, it told you information about, okay, how many people live at such and such city, what's the tax, what's the tax income for the state in that place, that kind of. So it was basically government-related information. And then what are the sites that I have to see when I go there, right? That was it. And another thing, another little aid that people had was the so-called 노정기. So maybe if you know a little, does anyone know classical Chinese by any chance? A little bit, but maybe you know numbers. So this is basically from the capital all the way to Huaiyang, which is where Kumgangsan is located. It's giving you different names for particular sites and postal stations. So people were traveling along the postal station road, okay? And so it gives you the names of these stations, and then it gives you the distance between those places. So 30 ri to the next one, and then 50 ri to the next one. So you kind of know, okay, I've been walking for 40 li now. I should be arriving soon at my next lodging, right? So this is what they did. And then they calculated all the numbers. It's like, okay, it was so and so many li to get from Seoul to Kumgangsan. So it was about 150 kilometers, which doesn't sound like a lot today. But back in the day, on horseback, it took about a week. So 4 to 5 days minimum to get from Seoul to Kumgangsan. And then there was, for instance, this fellow, An Gyeong-jom, he had a low-level government position. He wanted to go and see Kumgangsan. And he figured out a method. So while he was working at the royal court, he made friends with some higher-up government official who was then promoted or transferred to a position in Gangwon province. And so he kind of connected with that person and then tried to get a permission to use the postal stations, etc., on the road. So he got connected to people in Gangwon province who gave him a permission so he could travel for free, basically. Like lodging and food was all provided because he had this kind of little permission letter from someone higher up that he took with him. He was even able to have a luggage transported in advance, so he didn't have to carry it all the way. I mean, imagine that. Isn't that convenient, right? But this is something that very few people were able to do in the Choson period, right? So without connections or money, it was very, very difficult to go and see Kumgangsan back in the 17th to 19th century. So what I did when I did a postdoc at Harvard University for 3 years, I saw what Norbert Weber saw. This is a still from a video that is available online. So you can see people, masons carving people's names. So this was still going on in the colonial period, actually, but it goes back to earlier times. So when I was at Kumgangsan in 2014, I took pictures. I took like 8,000 something pictures of the rocks. And then during a 3-year postdoc, I spent most of my time looking at these pictures and transcribing the names I was able to decipher. And I found that I discovered around 4,500 names of people. So all those inscriptions on the rocks are not poems, are not Buddhist sutras. They're all people's names, okay? And half of them, more than 2,300 or so, are in clusters. What does this tell us? It tells us that people traveled in groups and they had their names carved as a group, right? So this is an example of a multi-generational agnatic cluster. So what does this mean? It means that over generations, people from the same family went to the mountain. They knew that their ancestor had been to the mountain, so they kept looking for their ancestor's name. They found it. They got excited. They cleaned it up. They walked back and forth. They touched it. They felt the spiritual connection with their ancestor. And then they would carve their name below their ancestor's name, because you would not carve above. You would, you're junior, so you have to carve your name below, okay? So this is exactly what happened. So we've got basically 3 times people carved their names, and Yoon Se-guk actually, he went twice, once with his elderly family members and once with his juniors. And so that's why he is in the center. And he was the governor of Gangwon, lots of power, right? And so having a multi-generational cluster like that at Kumgangsan is something that very, very few people, only from very powerful families, were able to create. And then on the other hand, we have associative clusters. So these are clusters of people that were not elite, okay? So here we have 4 names. What do you think? Who do you think is the senior? 맞아요. Yeah. So the one on the very right is a little bit higher. See that? It's a little bit senior. And then what about these 3 people? What do you think is their social rank? Is it the same or is it a different rank? Do they all have the same rank or a different rank? Same size, same height? Yes, so they're all the same rank. They were all jungin, which means they were clerks, government clerks, working at the royal court, okay? And this person was a eunuch working at the court. Okay, so he was a little older, a little higher up, and so there we have a group of a eunuch and 3 government clerks who traveled to Kumgangsan in the late 19th century. And without this inscription, we would never know about their friendship, because they didn't leave any writings. They're not elite. They didn't leave any literary collections or travel diaries, none of that. So how I figured that out was I looked up their names in government records, and I found their names. So these 3 jungin, they passed jungin-related government exams, and that's how I know that they were actually working as government clerks at the royal court. And he also appears in government records, royal records. But the connection between these 4 people doesn't appear in any written records. So this is really where we see the value of these inscriptions. They really tell stories that we would otherwise never get to see, particularly of non-elite people. So what's the final step? Well, the final step, okay, you made it. You saw Kumgangsan. What do? You come back home and then you write a little travel record. So why is it important to write a travel record? Of course, you can do it for yourself, just to remember what you saw, what you experienced. But back in the Choson, it was very important to leave something for your descendants. Leave a memory for your descendants. So that was a primary motivation to write a travel account, so your son and your grandson, your great-grandson could read it later on, okay? That was the main motivation. So are you ready? Maybe we can look at one board game and maybe one song and then wrap it up, okay? All right, so there are screens in the late Choson that basically served as mnemonic devices to familiarize oneself with culturally important sites, iconic sites at Kumgangsan. So this is an example from the Lium Museum by an unidentified artist, and he basically took the virtual traveler through Kumgangsan. So you would see all those different temples and peaks. They all have names, so you could identify them. And again, this is not a Mercator-based map, so the sites are all mixed up, so that you got a site of Inner Kumgang right next to the site from Outer Kumgang. So if you wanted to have an actual travel experience, it doesn't work. But if your whole motivation is to basically memorize what you need to know to appear cultured, then that works, okay? So this was one way, travel through these narrative screens. Another way was to play board games. And this was particularly popular among children. The elites also had board games made to educate their children, and then the non-elites and the lower elites would also do that. So let me show you an example. So this is a board game that you can actually see at the National Folk Museum. It's on view. So you can go, it's fairly large. So the center has the title, Chart of Visiting Famous Spots in Choson. And then it starts, these are the protagonists, okay? So you could imagine being a green sleeve poet, and I think we have a woman too, yes, and a little fisherman, and I think a monk as well. There must be 5. Yeah. And these are all figures probably coming out of novels, popular novels from the late Choson. And then the whole chart is basically representing, this is Hansong, this is Seoul, okay? So from there we would go on a trip through the entire peninsula. And this board game is structured according to province. So you would go through Gyeonggi province and then, go and counterclockwise. And then at the end, on this side, on the left side, these are all the famous sites of Gangwon province. And there's Kumgangsan. There's Kumgangsan. In Hwaeyang, and then, maybe you've played Yutnori before, you would throw the dice, and depending on the number, you would have the highest, it takes you to Manseru, the lowest takes you to Cholyong. And so what people do when they got punished, they had to drink. So drinking was a punishment, and while they were on their way, they would also have to compose poems. Okay, so that was a literary pastime, and this is another example of someone who was not elite. He was elite. Yu Bonjong was elite, but he didn't have a government position, and so in the mid-19th century, one day he gathered all his friends, all unemployed, all elite aristocratic background, but no job. So they all got together, they played this game, traveling through the country, imagining actually going there, and then one starting out from his place in Seoul, and then there's Kumgangsan, and the person who got on that spot of Kumgangsan had to compose a record, travel record, to show their knowledge about Kumgangsan. This is a very unique case because it's circular. Usually board games are rectangular, right? But this one is circular, so that's why I wanted to have it in my book. It was kind of a unique case. And then songs. So Kumgangsan songs, there were quite a few written in the late 19th century, like the paintings and the board games. Again, they took people on imaginary travels to Kumgangsan. So this one's actually dated, I think 18 something. So this is how it starts. Okay, friends, let's do these words, and then becoming a little bit philosophical, and then the next part is it's giving us the date, so 1816. You put on your straw sandals, you arrive at Doso Gate, so leaving Seoul, and then going little by little all the way to Kumgangsan, right? Traveling through these important sites that you had to know. Yes. So in conclusion, if you ask any scholar who works on Korean art or visual culture, and you mention the name Kumgangsan, they will all think about paintings, okay, the ones that I showed earlier, of Chosån and Kim Hong-do, etc. But, as I just showed today, there's a variety of material, visual material, that people were using as a mnemonic device to travel to Kumgangsan, right? So this is really something we should keep in mind, whether it's textual, visual, auditory, or performative. And another thing that I learned while researching travel in pre-modern Korea is that, for us today, it's important to get to a place, right? We at the airport, we're annoyed because the plane is not departing, and we're not really enjoying the way or the travel itself, but we want to get to the destination. But the more I read these travel accounts from the Choson, the more I realized for the people back then, actually the journey itself was important too. Because on the journey you would see many important sites as well and connect with people on the way. So maybe it's a different kind of approach to travel, perhaps, in comparison to what we're thinking today. And it was really important for people who were did not belong to any powerful family in the Choson to still develop a sense of cultural belonging and gain some cultural cachet by knowing what's important to know about Kumgangsan. So inner Kumgangsan, Chang'ansa, Mampokdong, outer Kumgangsan, Goryeo Pokpo, right? These are the most important sites I need to know about in order to appear cultured. So that was really, really important, particularly for the not so powerful people. And what's really important to learn about Kumgangsan is that it is the most, culturally most important site in Korea, one could say, perhaps even today. And this is my presentation. I hope the last slide will also work. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to get any questions or comments from you.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you everyone for your active participation and interest in the lecture. This is very promising that this is the very first series of the lecture of the year 2024, as Dr. Wu mentioned earlier. So we'd like to see you again at the next lecture. On behalf of the Academy of Korean Studies, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to all the participants who have joined us today and who will be joining us next time. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to the staff of the Academy who have contributed to making this lecture very meaningful and successful. May I ask for a big hand for everybody, please?